So good evening, my name is Lakin Clowers, and today I'll be presenting my project on the Cultural Solution Project for Duwakat, Nepal. So we're going to be talking about a health barrier in this particular region, or this location. There are multiple health barriers that have been notified and identified in this area. However, for this project, we're going to focus on one particular health barrier, and that health barrier is hypertension. Hypertension is a non-communicable disease, and in this area of Nepal, we're seeing an increase in non-communicable diseases, especially in hypertension. It's becoming a common cause for morbidity in this area, and there's a high prevalence of the disease in the general population, as well as in this particular location, Nepal, that we're talking about. And more specifically, I want to talk about the ethnicity group, the Tibeto-Burmans, and they are a group that's founded in this same location. A study conducted showed that 25.3% of this ethnicity group has hypertension. They met the criteria, and that criteria was determined on 3 blood pressure readings, and they were averaged together. An additional study in 2012 was conducted to see if ethnicity did play a role in determining, who had hypertension, who didn't, and that study did confirm that this ethnicity group did in fact have, were at an increased risk for hypertension. It's important to note that this is one ethnicity group found in this location of Nepal, but there's also another ethnicity group as well. And that ethnicity group is the Indo-Aryans. And when the study was conducted on that ethnicity group as well, the hypertension rate was only 17.5% among that population. So we can see that with the 25.3%, there is a greater risk of hypertension developing in this ethnicity group. And so we're going to look at some other studies and kind of see why that is and what's going on in this area. So first we'll look at some cultural determinants. Things like age, sex, marital status, their education, wealth index, their ecological zone, their province of residence, and their body mass index, in addition to their consumption of alcohol and caffeine. The study that was conducted in 2016, these are all things that were pulled from it and compiled into the Demographic and Health Survey that was published on the location in Nepal that we're talking about. In this study, there was 13,304 participants, and the majority of those were female. The majority had been married before, and they lived in urban settings. So while that is a large number of participants, it's important to note that also did not include the entire population count of the particular ethnicity group that we're focusing on. However, 1/5 of the participants were from Province 3, and that falls under this demerit, and we'll discuss more about why that's important in the upcoming slides. The study did conclude that the risk of developing hypertension increased with age, and that risk was almost 20-fold higher for respondents that were 65 years and older, and that's some data pulled directly from the 2016 survey that was conducted. Additionally, the study showed that men are more likely to develop hypertension than women. However, I think it is important to note that while age and sex are risk factors, they are non-modifiable, meaning there's nothing we can do about those. We can't change those. So I want to spend the majority of this presentation focusing on the cultural demerits that we can change, and that's education and body mass index. Those were 2 of the top reasons for an increase in hypertension in this area. So to begin with, we'll talk about the province of residence. So like I mentioned, the ethnicity group that we're discussing is located in number 3. Nepal is broke down into 7 different provinces. And if we look over here on this diagram or this table, we see that out of the 13,304 participants, it divides up who had hypertension and who did not. Out of that population count, we have 10,649 who did not have hypertension compared to the 2,655 participants who did meet the criteria to be diagnosed with high blood pressure. So when we look at the different percentages in the different 7 regions or the 7 provinces, we see that number 3 had the highest rate at 25.9. And so that is, an alarming number considering that the second highest was only 17.8. So we can definitely see that even based on this area that there is a huge need to respond and create some type of program to help combat this increase of hypertension in this area. Additionally, there was the cultural demerits of age and BMI. Again, age is one of those non-modifiable ones that we can't do anything about. However, we can do some focus and speak to the body mass index in relation to being overweight or obese. This table is pulled from an article that was published in 2010, and this study was conducted to evaluate the obesity prevalence in Nepal. Additionally, the article evaluated the public health challenges that were being faced worldwide and kind of compared that to the data that was pulled to create this diagram for the Nepal area, specifically to the region or the area that we're discussing. So as we can see, the table does conclude that the age group of 50 to 64 has a higher percentage of individuals that are overweight and that have an increased hip ratio. However, those between 35 to 49 years old have a higher percentage of obesity than the other 2 groups. So we can kind of see based on this table how the age and the body mass index, how that correlates and how that plays a role in it. And of course, we know that obesity does increase the risk of hypertension as that presents as a risk factor and causes further complications. And I also want to speak to the demerit of education. We can see that based on this table, this information was pulled from the 2016 data that we previously discussed in the earlier part of this presentation. But in this particular ethnicity group, we have 5,515 participants that reported they did not have any education at all, compared to the 3,676 that stated they had a secondary education. So we can look at the different levels of education, the different participants that said they had the various types of education, and then over here we can compare that to those who did not have hypertension and those who did have hypertension. So we can see that there is a high percentage of this ethnicity group that did not have education that have hypertension. That's a 48.1%. So again, that's an alarming number. That's almost, half of that population. So we definitely, or half of the population that participated. So we can definitely see the need for education and developing a program and really going in to help combat this health barrier that we're facing right now in this area. So with that, so that's kind of the program, or the heartbeat of this education program, is to really increase education among the Tibetan-Burmese population. So we have 3 short-term goals that I would like to accomplish in this program. First, identify risk behaviors related to high blood pressure and their environment. So really, we have the studies and we've been able to identify some risk factors, but now let's go in and be part of the culture and see, okay, based on those studies, have some risk factors increased, have some gotten worse, and really identify what core ones we want to focus on. Primarily, of course, education is the big key or the big part of this program, but what other risk factors do we need to focus on based on our relationships that we build among the community? Secondly, another short-term goal is to develop a strategy. So we identify these factors, and now let's develop a strategy and a plan to combat this. How can we decrease the rate of hypertension among this ethnicity group? And then finally, create education to present to communities. So we definitely need some type of infographic or brochure or pamphlet or posters, some type of education that we can leave with them even after the program is completed and we withdraw from it. But what can we do? How can we create, implement education throughout the community? And then with my long-term goals, long-term I want to implement a strategy to decrease the number of patients with hypertension among the culture. So we developed that strategy in the short-term goal, so now that long-term goal is to implement that. Additionally, to improve the community's health literacy concerning health-seeking behaviors and hypertension. And that's, a key part of this that goes along with that education is how can we increase their knowledge so that they feel confident in making sound health decisions based on what's best for them. How can we increase that education so they feel confident in the decisions that they make to improve their health? And lastly, I want to help the community connect and integrate these behavior changes into their health belief model. So we present the plan, we show them what changes need to be made, and now how can they implement that into their lifestyle? How can they implement that into their changes, throughout the community, amongst their individually and among their households. And so let's help them, complete that puzzle by teaching them how to integrate it and make those needed behavioral health changes. So of course, with any program, those are long and short-term goals, but they need to be put into SMART objectives, which really help, focus in and help make sure that the program stays on track. So real quickly, I do have 6 SMART objectives. By December 31st, 2021, 80% of the staff will be trained to on the pathophysiology and the etiology of hypertension. So I want my staff to be aware and understand the ins and outs of hypertension. By December 31st of 2022, staff will identify 5 risk behaviors related to hypertension among this culture. By June 31st of 2023, my staff will develop a strategy to implement behavior change throughout the culture. And so those are the 3 of the SMART objectives. And the final 3 is by December 31st of 2023, staff will develop 3 sources of education in their language to prepare to distribute and hand out throughout the community. By the end of 2024, my staff and I will be able to present and implement the developed strategy to at least 53% of the culture. I know it will be impossible to reach everybody within that year, but our goal was to at least reach 53%, and then in hopes that they will take their knowledge and excitement and share it with their family and friends throughout their culture. And finally, by the end of 2025, our staff will help improve the community health literacy and the ability to integrate behavioral health changes into the behavioral health model by 42%. So I really want to see this health literacy and the ability to make these behavior changes to increase by 42% among the community by the end of this 5-year program. So with any program, there's also the need for a budget. So in my budget, we have 40% going to contractual. That includes educational seminars, training staff, and volunteers, and really preparing them to understand hypertension. 15% related to travel, traveling throughout the villages, traveling to their the place that they're staying, that sort of thing. 25% is personnel pay, paying the the leadership and the staff. 9% is equipment such as printers and things like that that will be needed to develop the educational material. 4% is supplies like ink and paper that will be needed to print, and additionally paper, pencils for note taking, that sort of thing. And then 7% is there for just expenses that come up we're unaware of, whether the vehicle needs repaired or the printer breaks, something like that. It's important to have an allotted amount of money to cover those unexpected costs. And lastly, I just want to briefly discuss the funding sources. So we have 20% coming from donations, 15% from fundraisers, 45% from government grants, and 20% from partnerships. And finally, every program needs an evaluation. So we want to evaluate how are the short and long-term goals being met. We want to look at the inflow and outflow of revenue to the program. Is it helping accomplish the SMART goals that we've developed? Is the program operating at a pace that's needed to meet those SMART goals and objectives? And finally, and most importantly, are the needs of the community being met? Because if that's not being met, then we need to back up and kind of reevaluate and alter our plans so that their needs of the community are being met. So that's the end of the cultural solution project that I've created to implement into this region of Nepal. And thank you for your time.